Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today I'm bringing you a review for Thrones of Britannia. Full disclosure, I received a review key from Creative Assembly, and no, that does not affect what I'm about to say in any way, and I think that's going to be pretty clear pretty quickly. Just a bit of context as to the lens from which I'm reviewing the game. I've been playing Civilization since I was about 2 years old. I'm a fan of games like Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis, and I've played Total War games since Shogun 1. So I'm a pretty big fan of strategy games, grand, turn-based, whatever it might be, and I love games that challenge me. Hopefully that gives you an idea of whose thoughts you're about to hear. After all, reviews are subjective. I'm also not a fan of assigning arbitrary numbers to feelings. Instead, I will present to you my thoughts on the game, good and bad, and I will summarize my recommendation at the end. Thrones of Britannia is the first Total War Saga game, and it focuses on the British Isles after the initial Viking invasions. You can play as English, Welsh, Gallic, Viking Sea King, or Great Viking Army factions, with 2 of each type available at launch. If you're not familiar with Total War games, they are unique in how they balance turn-based campaign map play, where you manage your kingdom and raise armies to then fight in real-time battles. The 10 factions, divided into 5 cultures, give a decent spread across the land, and each has its own challenges and unique elements to keep them apart. We're not going to see the same variety as a Warhammer game, of course, and the relatively small geographical area means the differences as far as units are concerned are more about quality than type, though there are still faction-specific units, naturally. One faction will have better cavalry or ranged units, another will have better axe infantry, and another still might have access to crossbows. This can affect your playstyle should you choose to take advantage of these elements, and beyond armies, each faction and culture has other unique factors on a campaign level. The Here King mechanic has Northumbria balancing English and Norse citizens' happiness. Expeditions have Viking Sea Kings going out to look for trouble or plunder. Welsh kingdoms seek heroism to bring various buffs to the faction. Again, great steps in the right direction, and I'm happy to see these kinds of mechanics being implemented. I hope Creative Assembly continues to explore these kinds of separations between factions in historical games, and makes them more prominent. Some here are excellent, like the Here King mechanic, while others are okay at best, like the Expedition mechanic, which I thought was great at first, but after spending more time with it, it just felt alright, as opposed to a driving force. In some cases, the common thread is increase X by winning battles and conquering land, and you'll get buffs to public order, melee skills, leadership, influence, or some combination of them, and then there are some that just give you missions, and these all feel different only in name and description. The new minor settlement system being implemented is really interesting. No longer is there a constant garrison, instead forcing you to field armies that garrison threatened minor settlements and respond to enemy movements. I was very apprehensive about the change at first, but after playing with it, it has certainly won me over. This new approach makes rebellions and small enemy forces much more of a threat, especially when you lose important farming or commercial villages. More than once I've had the AI circumvent my forces on the campaign map with a tiny army in order to gain a foothold behind me and then immediately strengthen that flanking army. So this implies that campaign AI is actually looking for these opportunities and taking advantage of them when possible. I wish these minor settlements fulfilled more than a singular role or had space for more than just 1 or 2 structures, but I understand that as a representation of the times, so that's fine. I did notice, however, that the AI doesn't seem prepared for a potential rush on multiple settlements at once and doesn't respond to roving armies or what I would argue are clear indications of war on the horizon. This means that with a little bit of patience, you can often cripple powerful enemy nations by taking many undefended minor settlements and even major ones. When it comes to the major settlements, siege battles are a high point, and I found myself excited to put cities under siege to see what I'd have to tackle and to plot out how I'd go about doing it. In Warhammer, siege battles were often boring, a slog at the single wall or the gates, and here we have something quite special, and I want to fight siege battles more often than not. Unfortunately, early on, I always had a great upper hand in numbers, and so the danger wasn't as real, but when full battles between multiple stacks and garrisons took place, they were an absolute joy to fight and watch. There are some very unique layouts that are thoroughly fun to defend or attack, and the amount of work put into making them interesting for a variety of unit types is great. Wide open spaces for maneuvering, tight spaces and choke points to hold back the enemy, multiple angles of approach, multiple entry points, land and sea approaches where applicable. There was an odd battle here or there where the AI formed up in a non-ideal way, or the gate where I had my backup forces rather than my main force, but that mostly happened when they were outnumbered 4-1 anyway and they were terribly surrounded. Field battles are fine, as are minor settlement battles. Minor settlements offer strategic options as well, such as using the town structure to create choke points, while field battles can happen on some very interesting terrain, sometimes offering great tactical opportunities, but often being a matter of two lines moving into each other till one gives up. I guess that's reflective of the times. A battle length is a little bit better than it was before, but I think they could be a bit longer. The average battle goes between 8 to 12 minutes. While I don't need a 60-minute battle every time I fight, I'd like the average to sit at a comfortable 15 to 20, I think. Back on the campaign map, food and supply mechanics are a welcome addition, adding some more considerations when recruiting units or staying in enemy territory. I would often find myself suffering from attrition as I like to starve my people for the greater good of my kingdom, but I can't help but feel that the mechanic isn't punishing enough. I don't think I ever felt unable to just take the hit, opting to raise a larger army at the cost of having negative food more often than not. It does look like the AI has to deal with the mechanics as well. I've seen armies go from full strength to less after I'd taken all settlements, guaranteeing a food and supply deficit for the enemy. This and the changes to minor settlements are perhaps some of my favorite changes being introduced here. Another change that I particularly like is how recruitment works, costing food and money and forming a new unit over time to full health to reflect the slow arrival of troops. And there's a limited recruitment pool that replenishes over time, the size and speed of which is based on structures in your kingdom. It sounds like a small detail, but it changes the pace of things on the campaign map, as you aren't able to instantly raise a large defensive force the moment an enemy army arrives at your city limits, or do the same to perform a surprise attack. Internal politics and family matters are fairly well implemented. We're not looking at Crusader kings here, but you will find yourself picking wives for your men and trying to arrange marriages for your daughters. You will find yourself managing loyalties of your family in court, and you will often be buying the loyalty of troublemakers, or potentially assassinating them instead. Political events such as being blackmailed, finding out one of your people wants to have you killed, etc. will come up every once in a while and bring important and interesting decisions to your doorstep that might hurt your influence or cost you in one way or another. I'm also a big fan of the idea of governors and estates. Governors work well. Just like you pick a general to lead an army, you pick a governor to take care of a region, and their traits, followers, and spouses have different effects that compound to make them good or bad governors. Of course, like generals, they will gain more traits over time depending on how and where they live, and this can make them better or worse in their roles. Estates are formed when you obtain or build certain structures, and if you own too many of them directly, your subjects feel slighted, loyalty will drop, and you might have a civil war on your hands, so you must dole them out to make them happy. The trouble that stems from estates is solved a little too easily, unfortunately, but it is a step in the right direction. I also am okay with how public order works, and I'm a little confused by the hate the system receives. With the plus 100, negative 100 scale, you knew exactly when a rebellion was going to pop, and you could even force it. Now, since the chance of a rebellion always exists when you're in the negatives, you're a bit more on your toes. Sure, a 1% chance isn't scary, but as the negative gets higher, the situation gets worse. Maybe I play more aggressively than most, resulting in bigger penalties, but a blend of the two systems might be ideal. Negatives stack every turn toward a total of negative 100, but right up until that negative 100, there's a percentage chance of a rebellion happening based on the current public order level. The tech tree is also a welcome change, in my opinion, with technology now being locked behind player action in what feels like a relevant way. Your siege equipment doesn't have the chance of getting better if you've never built siege equipment. Your cavalry can't be superior if you've never fielded a cavalry unit, and you cannot research toolmaking if you have no smith. So naturally, your technological improvements in those areas are going to be locked behind such actions, structures, or recruitment options. The only problem with the tech tree is the sameness of it across the board, once again showing a system that is interesting but not deep or varied enough. The removal, or rather the reduction of stances, is something that has really been a step backwards. We've already been seeing a lot of conversation on the matter, so I'll keep it brief. But having only 3 stances, regular, fortify, and raid, and removing forced march and ambush makes no sense. These are both important options on the campaign map, helping you chase or intercept the enemy on one hand, or hide from them or overcome a superior force on the other. The explanation given for the decisions is also not something I really understand. In the case of Forced March, the idea that follower buffs are equivalent ignores the fact that in Warhammer, for example, one could get extra movement range from the skill tree without adverse effects to the army, and then get even more through Forced March, but with some adverse effects. As for ambushes, a statistic that says people rarely fight ambush battles ignores how often people use the stance for other purposes. And the historical explanation that ambushes weren't all that common is also a strange one given other exclusions in the game. On the one hand, no ambush battles because history, and on the other, no historically accurate river traversal because it wasn't easy to implement. It sounds like a case of having one's cake and eating it too, and without a more consistent answer, it tells me there's just a lack of resources dedicated to the project, be it time, manpower, or finances. And that's okay, it explains the reduced price point, but if it's the case, I'd like to be told that's the reason. This is just speculation, we don't know if it is the case, please don't quote me on it.
You can count on us!
Diplomacy is also a mechanic that falls short, often feeling pointless, and that feeling is compounded with the now pre-existing trade agreements with nations you're not at war with. While some might be happy that the chore of negotiating trade agreements is gone, I would much rather have to manage relationships for meaningful results. I want to go back and forth and try to make people like me so I can get resources from them, whether it's money or materials or military might. In that same vein, I'm a little disappointed at the removal of agents. At first it sounded excellent, no more agent spam or losing a high-tier general to a lowly assassin, but I find myself not only missing the agents but hoping for more variety and better execution. I understand that followers add some of the effects to the generals and their armies, that's all well and good. But what about assassinating enemy kings and generals? What about sending a spy to scout a distant settlement or to open the gates for my forces? A lot of options are removed as a result of removing agents, and I'd rather deal with agent spam if it means I can have all these options. Alternatively, there needs to be a better way of implementing the system so there's none of the spam, but all of the fun. From an aesthetic perspective, the audio-visual experience is fantastic. The music is amazing, a constant with Total War games, and visually the campaign map is absolutely breathtaking and alive. Lush greens turn to frigid snow-covered plains, clouds open up bringing rain, merchants travel from city to city or port to port, and as cities grow, you can see them actually grow on the campaign map, which is something we had before. I'm just glad we have it back. It adds a nice touch of life to the cities. Siege battles are also a sight to behold. The cities look magnificent, and seeing massive forces clash while fiery arrows fly through the sky, trying to shoot down the men as they push siege towers and battering rams, while reinforcements row hard as they can to get to the nearby beaches, well, it's quite satisfying to put it lightly. Up close, it's a joy watching men fall to ranged fire, raising their shields to stay safe, and cavalry charges, while not as impactful as in some previous titles, feel better than they did in early versions of Thrones, throwing infantry around, trampling soldiers, and, my personal favorite, getting shot down on approach. The atmosphere is great, especially during a foggy or rainy day, and the din of battle is fantastic as well. On the topic of visuals, I think the UI is great, and the unit cards and cinematics done in a historically relevant art style is a great call to bring it all home. Overall, Thrones of Britannia feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Still progress, but at the cost of a few important things. Certainly a satisfying experience if you're hungry for more historical gameplay. If you've only ever played Warhammer Total War and its sequel, I can recommend this game, especially if you like the time period. If you're a historical fan, it could go either way, depending entirely on how the new mechanics and the era grab you. The siege battles and the new province, food, supply, and recruitment mechanics are great, even if they could stand to go deeper, and I certainly think the political and family management side of things bring back more interesting elements. The story-driven and event-driven angle, along with some decent differences between faction mechanics, make for some replayability as well. However, it does not feel like the next Total War game. Probably because it isn't. It's a Total War Saga game, a spin-off title, and it's priced and built as such. There are some questionable exclusions as far as systems are concerned, and the new ones could stand to go a lot deeper. Overall, the game feels wide but shallow. I'm a fan of the era, so I do find myself interested in the game, and I intend to play it through a few times, and I think it's worth the price point. The biggest trouble with Thrones of Britannia is that it's releasing very close to the next Total War title, and if Thrones of Britannia is just a half step of moving forward, I'd rather wait for the full step.